You might be surprised just how often we see a link between the fairy realm and the spirit realm. A great example of this is the fetch, which is considered to be directly connected to the fairies. A fetch is a kind of supernatural double or vision of a person. At first glance, and depending of course on where you see a fetch, you might think it a doppelganger, a lookalike or a twin of someone, but it is not. Neither is a fetch a ghost. It is an apparition of a living person who has just died or is about to die.
A case published in Haunted England, 1940, tells the experience of Sir William Napier. Napier was travelling from Bedfordshire to Berkshire and stopped at an inn for the night on his journey. When he was shown to his room, he was alarmed to see a corpse lying on the bed. Upon closer inspection, he was astonished to see that the corpse was himself. Shortly after arriving in Berkshire, he died.
In England, a fetch may sometimes be called a co-walker, but no matter its name, seeing a fetch is a sign of ill boding, that you can be sure something ominous is about to happen. I wonder what thoughts Napier entertained as he lay in bed that night, if he had knowledge of the fetch and what it meant, or if he just thought his mind was playing tricks on him. Well, he clearly thought enough of what he saw to share the experience with other people before he died. So we find that the fetch is seen by the person themselves, but it's also believed that fetches can be seen by people who possess a clairvoyant ability and have no connection to the person at all. But fetches are also seen by the friends or family of the living person just prior to or at the moment of that person's death.
Myself and Mary were coming from Morris's with the milk one evening, about the end of March, 1936. It was dusk at the time. As we were coming towards the school cross, I thought I saw a tall woman, dressed in black, coming across the road towards Davy's Weave Gate. We watched her go into the gate. I thought first it was Mrs. Bart, as she was tall like her, but she came back from the gate and turned to go down the road towards Howlands. I thought then it was Granny O'Neill, and I remarked to Mary that it was queer for her to be out, as we knew she was very sick at the time. Mary saw her too, and she wondered as well as myself. We hurried on to catch her down the road, but when we came round the turn, there was no sign of her, and we didn't know what to think. She was the living image of Mrs. O'Neill. Mrs. O'Neill died on the last day of April. I'm sure it was her fetch that we saw that evening.
It's easy to think of the fetch as just a ghost, and to put the notion of it tucked up in a box with a label and a nice little bow, but I think this would be a mistake. You see, there are many who steadfastly believe that fairies play an active part in the appearance of the fetch. Take a listen to this extraordinary account from County Kerry.
Near Listowel, in a district known as Gorta, the youngest child of a family was one night very ill. The man of the house was out, and the mother was in bed. The boy lay in a cot in the kitchen, with his elder sisters minding him, awaiting the homecoming of their father. As the hour neared 12, the girls distinctly heard the sound of footsteps coming up to the door and the sound of loud raps on the door. Then the steps were heard to turn immediately and go round the corner of the house. The sisters were not perturbed, thinking it was their father who had changed his mind and gone round the barns before coming in. Half-hour later, they heard his step outside and hurried to let him in. On asking him if he had knocked before, he answered, no. He told them that he'd just come straight from a neighbour's house and hadn't knocked before, nor gone round to the barns. Immediately, the child in the cradle began to cry. Nothing would soothe him, and 2 hours later he was dead. The old people around were of the firm opinion that the good people had come to fetch him at midnight, and it was none other than one of them who had knocked and walked so slowly round the house. Another neighbour, returning home late from a fair on the same night, told afterwards how the figure of a little child clothed in a white garment had flitted over the bog and vanished into the darkness. He had thought it to be imagination, but afterwards said the vision was singularly clear while it lasted. The fetch of the little boy was seen as an indication that the good folk had marked him for their own.
Assuming the fairies do know when some humans are close to death, why send a fetch? Could this be a practice used by a certain race within the fairy realm? Or is it used because there is a singular purpose for that human soul once it's taken? Well, the appearance of a fetch is sure to capture our attention, and no doubt, but it's also quite eerie, and we can easily imagine that a person seeing a fetch might be so spooked as to keep the information to themselves, at least for a while.
In one of our Irish cities, and in a room where the mild moonbeams of a summer night were resting on the carpet and on a table near the window, Mrs. Brown, wife of a doctor in good practice and general esteem, looking towards this window from her pillow, was startled by the appearance of her husband, standing near the table just mentioned, and seeming to look with attention on a book that was lying open on it. Now the living and breathing man was lying by her side, apparently asleep. And greatly as she was surprised and affected, she had sufficient command of herself to remain without movement, lest she should expose him to the terror which she herself at the moment experienced. After gazing at the apparition for a few seconds, she bent her eyes on her husband to ascertain if his looks were turned in the direction of the window, but his eyes were closed. She turned round again, though dreading the sight of what she now felt certain to be her husband's fetch, but it was no longer there. She lay sleepless throughout the remainder of the night, but still bravely refrained from disturbing her partner. Next morning, Mr. Brown, seeing signs of disquiet in his wife's countenance while at breakfast, made some affectionate inquiries. But she concealed her trouble, and at his ordinary hour he sallied forth to make his calls. Meeting Dr. Casey in the street and falling into conversation with him, he asked his opinion on the subject of fetches. "I think," answered Dr. Casey, "and so I'm sure do you, that they are mere illusions, produced by a disturbed stomach acting upon the excitable brain of a highly imaginative or superstitious person. Then, said Dr. Brown, I am highly imaginative or superstitious, for I distinctly saw my own outward man last night, standing at the table in the bedroom and clearly distinguishable in the moonlight. I am afraid my wife saw it too, but I have been afraid to speak to her on the subject. You have acted like a sensible man, but now be off to your patients, as I must run to mine. About the same hour on the ensuing night, the poor lady was again roused, but by a more painful circumstance. She felt her husband moving convulsively, and immediately after he cried to her in low and interrupted accents, "Ellen, dear, I'm suffocating. Send for Dr. Casey." She sprang up, huddled on some clothes, and without waiting for the slow movements of the servant, she ran to his house. He came with all speed, but his efforts for his friend were useless. He had burst a large blood vessel in the lungs and was soon beyond human aid. In the passionate lamentations which the bereaved wife could not restrain in the presence of the physician, she frequently cried out, "Oh, the fetch! The fetch!" At a later period, she told him of the appearance the night before her husband's death, and, as he thoroughly believed her statement, it left the theory he henceforth entertained on the subject of fetches in considerable confusion.
Could it be the appearance of the fetch is another way that fairies alert us to an impending death? And how do they know a person is about to die? Do we emanate a certain energy, a frequency or a scent when we are healthy and another when our life is fading? Please share your thoughts on the fetch and the fairies in the comments below. And if you enjoy my videos and would like to support the channel, please consider buying me a coffee. This is a quick, easy and safe way to donate a few dollars to help me keep making videos. Until next time, stay curious and be kind. Cheerio!